Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lucy, and I've recently completed my undergraduate psychology degree at Newcastle University. So as an elite touch athlete myself, this drove my motivation to explore amateur sport for my dissertation research. My study sought to examine the differences in pressure within the organisational environments of elite amateur touch rugby players and elite professional rugby union players. So today in my short presentation, I'll provide a brief background and overview of my research and then focus on three key interesting insights from my study, which I believe are intriguing and relevant, not just to touch and rugby union, but to sports in general, with an emphasis on amateur sports. So the study built upon the foundations of research that explored organisational stress in elite sport, but that has neglected to consider stress experienced by elite amateur athletes who are underfunded athletes. So as such, the study aimed to synthesize an understanding of organisational stressors experienced by professional union players and amateur touch players. It then looked to explore personal characteristics from which players benefit from to manage these organisational stressors. And finally, it looked to investigate any evident differences between the group's perceived organisational stressors and personal characteristics. So we followed strict inclusion criteria to determine how participants would be deemed as elite amateurs or elite professionals. So to classify a touch athlete as elite, we required them to have received an international cup to cap at a Touch World Cup, which is the highest level of competition in elite touch rugby. Male union players were classified as elite if they held full-time paid contracts for a club. However, as many female union players do not receive a salary when playing elite club rugby at the moment, we required them to be contracted to an international setup as well. So this ensured that touch players were elite amateurs where they received no financial backing, and union players were elite professionals where they received some financial backing. So we followed a qualitative methodology, and a sample of 26 male and female athletes presented in the table on the left here were proposively sampled. And adding weight to the findings of our study, the players competed across a variety of nations, numerous leagues, and many international competitions, as you can see here on the right-hand side. So it was really diverse, which was great. And so we conducted semi-structured interviews over Zoom, and then we analysed all of our data using reflective thematic analysis. And so on this slide, you can see the 5 general dimensions that were developed, and these are in the blue boxes. And then in the white boxes are the sub-themes which related to each main theme. And then the thin dotted line just shows slightly relationships between the sub-themes or the themes. So I'm now going to go on to discuss my 3 key insights and takeaways based on the overall findings. So firstly, we gained an understanding of the differences and commonalities of stressors experienced by both professionals and amateurs, so that sports psychologists can provide relevant support and coaches can be aware of the stressors that their athletes are facing within their environment. So both amateur and professionals identified stressors across social interpersonal relationships, organisational environment, and uncontrollable pressures. And this appeared to be consistent with previous research. However, where we found a difference was that some stresses were more prevalent between amateurs and professionals. So notably, touch players placed an emphasis on the lack of facilities available and the reduced support of their organisation. And this was inherently underlined by the lack of financial support in amateur sport, and which understandably professional rugby players did not corroborate with. However, female union players did also allude to some financial issues, but this happened to be in clubs that were more underfunded or not as well known. So this exposes the impact of underfunding on athletes and access to resources. And therefore, I would recommend to better support athletes to deal with potential stressors. Findings showed that organisations should increase the accessibility of psychological support. A lot of athletes noted that they didn't have access to a psychologist or any money to be able to fund it. So secondly, findings also indicated that forming relationships were integral to utilising coach and psychological support, which helped to mitigate the negative impact of stressors. So players mentioned the importance of relationships with their fellow players, their coaches, and their other organisational staff, such as physios. And they also placed an emphasis on making these connections off the field. And also inherent to this, personal characteristics and drivers appear to influence a player's ability to develop interpersonal skills, which assisted them to form these relationships. So self-confidence, being willing to learn, and dedicated were the 3 key skills that most players noted, as well as also having a drive of wanting to be the best. Interestingly, amateur players noted that they had better off-field relationships, and perhaps this could be due to the fact that it's a more social nature of the sport and they have more time to get together off the pitch. So current findings emphasize the importance of supporting athletes to develop personal characteristics to build resilience to stressors, and this could be facilitated through psychological skills trainings in clubs. And finally, following on from this, the study presented an indication that early developmental experiences are integral for players developing these psychological characteristics and therefore developing psychological resilience. So both groups referred to experiences within their formative years, which facilitated the development of personal characteristics, such as an experience in amateur organisations, which can prepare athletes for going into elite professional setups. So this is exemplified in this quote here by a player who played both in an international touch setup and internationally in rugby union and sevens. So providing athletes with a suitable environment in which to develop psychological characteristics to build resilience will benefit their ability to cope with organisational stresses in an elite environment across amateur and professional setups. So building on this, we'd recommend that youth sport organisations and coaches should facilitate and develop a programme of personal characteristics to ultimately support athletes when they reach an elite standard. However, there were some pitfalls to this. Male union players referred to an imbalance within the sport concerning independent education, suggesting that those who can afford private education were better placed on a pathway to elite success. And also from an amateur perspective, the self-funded nature of the sport lends itself to similar problems, reducing access to those who cannot afford to fund their own pathway. So this provided us with a valuable area for future research, as a reduced access to sport at a young age could determine whether elite pathways are a realistic aspiration for children from families with a lower socioeconomic status. So limiting access for children in their formative years could reduce opportunities to develop key characteristics that would support their development and ultimately their success in elite standard sport. So yeah, that was a really quick overview of what I found. There was a lot more, but obviously I'm a bit stuck for time. So thank you so much for listening, and I do hope you were able to take something away from my presentation. I popped my LinkedIn and my email on there if you do want any more information. But thank you.
Any questions for Lucy? Okay, I have a question, Lucy. You mentioned quite a lot about personal characteristics and how they would be useful to have those. Is there any advice that you would give coaches in order to build those? And
Yeah,
is there any was there anything that came out? So it's basically two questions. Moving from amateur to professional and how those personal characteristics helped with that, I guess.
Yeah, so I think one which was notable was that the exposure from amateur sport into the professional meant that the one athlete who I spoke to who had competed at touch and union, she was able to fit culturally within the team a lot quicker. And then she was able to adapt to the coaching styles. So her coaches commented that she was like just ready to take on the performance, and then they could just coach her how they wanted to. And I think drawing on from that as well, like to develop the characteristics, other players kind of noted that they built self-confidence when they were able to have autonomy and being able to build on that themselves. So being able to say, oh, we want to do this in this session today, but or that doesn't work for us, can we do this? And being able to be more confident in their training sessions then meant that when they went on the pitch, they were able to take that with them.
Very nice. I guess it makes a difference, doesn't it, to have a say in your own, and like, because that's what I like to teach as well, about like be your own coach, so that you're not constantly looking to a coach for feedback or for reassurance, so that you know that you take control of your own, I guess, development. So that's nice to hear.
Yeah, I think
time for
sorry.
You go.
I was just going to say, our player made a really interesting point that then when they were on the pitch and they were presented with a situation that they hadn't gone through in training, they were able to use their confidence and their ability just to overcome that issue without having to look for the coach to support. So
very nice. Got time for one more question? Anyone? Covered so extensively, Lucy, that you've stunned them into silence.
That's great.